My name is Doug Kysar. I'm the Joseph M. Field 55 Professor of Law at Yale University. Here at NUS, I have the honor of being the visiting Tan Ah Ta Professor of Law. At my home institution, I help lead a research team that is examining the climate change impacts of modern industrial animal agriculture. The way we produce meat in modern advanced economies contributes significantly to global greenhouse gas emissions. In the course of our research, we've also come to understand that industrial animal agriculture companies throughout the world are relatively underregulated, at least compared to other important sectors of the economy. So this combination of extensive causation of harm and relative lack of legal accountability has prompted me to wonder, are there other avenues of addressing these consequences of modern meat production? Are there perhaps technological substitutes, alternative technologies and sources of protein that might satisfy consumer demand without the same level of social and environmental externalities? The two technologies I'm going to be focusing on in this lecture are cultivated meat or lab-grown meat and germline genetic engineering. For cultivated meat, essentially scientists take stem cells from a living animal and use bioreactors to culture those cells into what can become a serviceable meat product that consumers will accept without having ever had to rear and raise an entire livestock animal. For germline engineering, on the other hand, scientists are working from the top down. They're taking the livestock animal, but they're trying to alter its DNA in a way that addresses some of the social and environmental harms of livestock production that I just described. What interests me about both of these technologies from a conceptual or theoretical level is that in these cases, we humans are the ones creating the kind of being that will come into existence, new forms of being. Whether we want to call them life or not is debatable, but new kinds of biological existence are being tailor-made according to our instructions and desires. What's interesting about that from a philosophical perspective is that, at least in the Western philosophical tradition, the ontological nature of the thing, its characteristics, its features, is supposed to be what determines whether we have ethical obligations to it. In this case, we are determining its nature, and so we can't take our ethical cues from its nature since we're designing it. I find that to be a really fascinating and vexing problem to consider. In the context of the genetic engineering technique that I was just describing, what's quite fascinating is that there are animal science companies and their allied academic researchers all over the world who are engaging in a practice called germline genetic engineering. This is affecting the DNA of an embryo or reproductive cells so that the animal that results from the DNA editing will be able to pass on those edits to future generations of that animal. Now, what's interesting about this is that around the world, there's a complete moratorium on such germline genetic engineering when it comes to human species. Yet for non-human species, we seem to have no such concerns. That's a fascinating topic from the legal perspective. What are the perceived differences between our species and their species that's driving this quite radical difference in treatment between the two categories of research? When it comes to cultivated meat, we've seen quite a bit of legal and regulatory activity, ranging from nations that are outright banning the sale or even the research into such cultivated meat products, to jurisdictions like right here in Singapore or Israel or the Netherlands, where the government is taking a much more proactive and supportive stance, viewing cultivated meat as a potential innovation that could solve many of the world's growing problems in relation to environmental harms and other harms of the global food system. Still, other jurisdictions, when it comes to lab-grown meat, are trying to control the way in which those products are marketed, often requiring labels or banning the use of certain terms like meat or milk in relation to these products. The earliest president I remember growing up in the United States was our President Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan took office in 1980. right after a decade in which the environmental movement exploded onto the world scene, emphasizing the fact that we humans might be exceeding biological limits of the planet's ability to support ourselves. In the midst also of great concern over the oil crisis and the scarcity of natural resources. And Ronald Reagan came into office and promised morning in America, a new era of abundance in which humans faced no limits, and all we needed to do was pursue economic growth. And the idea is that that economic growth would trickle down and everyone would benefit. Even as the wealthy seem to get wealthier, everyone would be lifted by a rising tide. This is just one of what I call dreams of abundance. There are many others out there. These are narratives we tell ourselves as devices or salves so that we don't worry about the perceived harmful effects of business as usual, whether it's the growing environmental crisis, the climate change crisis, wealth inequality, the potential massive suffering of animals in livestock production. These are features of our current business as usual that sometimes make us uncomfortable. The dreams of abundance instead provide us with a way of thinking we don't have to confront that. Somehow we're going to solve that problem without making sacrifices or changes or giving in to our ethical demands. I find the alternative protein context interesting because it's being pitched somewhat in these terms. Consumers, you can have your steak without guilt. I wonder if it is like those other dreams of abundance resting on a shaky empirical foundation, or whether instead we really have found something that could be a breakthrough technology that wins for all.